Okay. Welcome to Danish Policy. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
Yeah, and today we're going to talk another episode of the public service. Nowadays, everyone's on social media, expressing their own opinions. I just want to hear more about how do you maintain your own values and opinions without affecting your career in the public service.
Right. Okay, so that's a great question. First, you may notice, hopefully, a slight change in the production design and the lighting. A big shout out to Charlene's brother, Elwyn, and partner, Mel.
Mel, yeah.
Who came in here in their frustration at seeing what we had on the screen. They're sort of with their professional photography skills.
Yes.
They have a great food blog that has a squillion followers, and we'll leave a link in the description. But big shout out to those guys who came in and just without actually having to get a whole lot of new equipment, they have transformed the way everything looks. So yeah,
essentially Crispin looks better, so he's very grateful.
Yes, and that is a constant and trying task. So so that has worked out really well. But to answer your question, it is actually a really fraught area because we don't have in the public sector any clear guidelines really across what it means to live in the social media age. So, although there is a lot of talk about different, company policies, different departmental policies on how to manage one's personal and professional life, it's just not clear across the board. And for someone who, just wants to express an opinion about something, there's never a good understanding of where the line is. Are you able to join a political party? Are you able to express a view on government policy on your Facebook account? All this stuff that is just part of everyday life now is a real struggle for a public servant, and public servants have lost their careers over the things that they've said and done.
And then they lost their job.
Yeah, so there's a famous case here in Australia where a woman working for the then Department of Immigration was criticising Australian refugee policy, right? She would get on Twitter after work and constantly say things about, it was something over 10,000 tweets, slagging off Australia's refugee policy and slagging off the government and the department. And she did it under a pseudonym, and she did it outside her office hours and did it on her own personal devices. And yet she was still found out and fired. And this case went all the way to the High Court of Australia, which she lost. Now, I never would have said this publicly at the time because I think, I always have a sympathy with the underdog and so on. But I actually agreed with the High Court's decision. And the reason why is that she really called into question her ability to faithfully carry out government policy. This was I think that's where the line is. So there are two principles that I've worked by my entire professional life. And so far, touch wood, it has never got me into any trouble. And that's despite doing media all around the world on all different subjects. Everything from, nuclear weapons to vehicle clamping, right? I've been in the press on all kinds of issues. And by guiding these two principles, and anyone who's a current or aspiring public servant out there, I'd really recommend just abiding by these two rules. Rule number one, never comment publicly on the level of government you work for. So if you work in the state government, right, don't talk on your government. You talk about federal government, talk about other governments around the world, but don't talk about your own government because you work for them, right? It's inappropriate for you as a public official to make public comments about your own government, just as it would be inappropriate for you to talk about that in any other workplace, about your own bosses publicly, right? I mean, it's the same kind of principle.
So you work for state, you can talk about federal.
Yeah, or you can talk about other states as well.
Or other states, okay.
Yeah, so as long as if it's not your ministerial or your ministerial colleagues, then it's fine.
Yeah,
right? Because you're not obviously talking about the people that you're responsible for. And then the other principle that has worked well for me is don't talk about your own portfolio area of responsibility, right? So, and this is trying because you, as a public servant, you're usually interested in the work that you're doing and you have a whole lot of specialist knowledge about that area. However, I never comment publicly if I'm working in a particular area at that time about that portfolio, because my minister will have ministerial colleagues in that same space. They will have to cooperate and discuss. And if they feel like they're being undermined by their own departmental officials or even supported in an inappropriate way, then it can undermine the trust that exists between a minister and their department. And that is the basis of public sector professionalism. So in that space, I think that there is nothing wrong at all about having a public life and having very strong opinions about things and being an activist in different areas of policy. But as long as you abide by those two rules, don't comment on the government that you work for and don't comment on the portfolio that you work in. Those are constraints on your freedom of speech. Absolutely they are. But I think they're reasonable constraints to uphold the broader principle of an impartial, faithful public service that properly implements government policy, because ultimately it's the ministers that are accountable to the public, and you as an individual public official do not face that level of scrutiny, and therefore it's inappropriate for you to do anything that would undermine the minister.
What are some strategies for those who feel like they have stepped out of line?
Well, I mean, so if we'll come back to this High Court case. So she did it under a pseudonym, so it wasn't under her own name, and she did it in her own hours. These are two good things that you should do. But as the High Court said, the question isn't whether or not you are having a social life, a public life as a public official. It's whether or not you're acting in a way that a reasonable third party would look at it and say, is this person really capable of professionally and faithfully implementing government policy as an impartial instrument of government, right? So if you feel like you're perhaps toying a bit with that, obviously, first of all, read the departmental policies or the Public Service Commission policies relevant in your own jurisdiction on making public comment. Make sure you comply with those. Don't use government workstations, government equipment to make political commentary if you can avoid it. Like, everyone these days, like if you're at your work desk and someone messages you on Facebook, you're going to message back. Like that's just the reality of the modern workplace. But to keep anything that is contentious or controversial or of public interest on your social media during office hours to an absolute minimum. And if you're in doubt, ask. There was a op-ed that I wrote once when I was working in the area, and it was on Libya. And I asked my superior, I was like, look, I want to write this thing. Here is my draft. Do you think it's okay? And they gave the okay and it went ahead. And it was interesting because it was highly controversial. It did ultimately get me into trouble, but I was protected by the fact that I had actually consulted my line supervisor. And that was done beforehand, and I went through official channels to allow that to happen. So there was controversy brought up by that particular event, but it wasn't controversy that fell on any person's shoulders, really. It was just, please don't do it again. So you just the thing to have in mind is that when you are a public servant, you are absolutely entitled to having a public life. Like, you can express your view. You are a citizen. You never stop being a citizen. But for the sake of your own career and also the integrity of the public sector, try to ensure that whatever you do cannot be perceived as undermining your capacity as an individual to faithfully serve your minister. Just for your own sake, try and put yourself in the minister's shoes whenever possible. Could a reasonable person looking at what you have to say believe that you are speaking from a perspective of privilege, that you have access to information and sources that other people do not have access to by virtue of the fact that you are a public official? don't obviously breach any form of confidentiality. If you're shared information, that should not be shared any further than that. And always ask if there's something in particular you're concerned about. But as a rule, look, someone asked me the other day whether or not it was okay for them to sign a petition for, I think it was like Chile or somewhere, allowing people to escape the country because of COVID and the lockdowns and things like that. I mean, of course it is. Nothing to do with your work, nothing to do with even your branch of government, not even to do with your own government, right? You are just a citizen of the world in that respect. You can do whatever you like. Just when you do act publicly, think of your own area of portfolio responsibility and your own minister and put yourself in their shoes. And if you can do that and go, how would you feel in that space if a member for your department said or did X? If that would upset you, then don't do that. You know? So yeah, and I've only ever commented once publicly on. We're mindful that there's this thing that keeps wanting to fall down, and we can hear it. Yeah, well, hopefully it'll hold up. But one thing that I always try and keep in mind is to not be terribly afraid of expressing my view within the appropriate channels. So as a public servant, if I disagree with something, internally I'll express an opinion why, but I don't share that publicly because that's not my place to do so. Ministers are entitled to the privilege of their departments. It is absolutely essential to the functioning of democracy that ministers feel like they have the confidence of their senior officials. And as a consequence of that, it's a value which I strongly support and do expect people to be accountable for. So in the case of this woman, unfortunate what happened for her, but and to be fair to her, the rules have not been properly laid out, given the fact that we live in a social media age and everyone has a public profile in some respect. It's not clear for most people where the lines are. But again, recapping those two principles, don't comment on the level of government you work for and don't comment in your portfolio area. And if you do those two things, you should be okay. And if there's an exception, ask, and always try and put yourself in the minister's shoes.